family. Welcome to JFK Today, your direct link to all things politics, comedy, and culture. I'm your host, Janaya Future Khan, champ-yapper and frequent nuisance in the activist and comedy worlds. Let's get dialed in. We have one key topic, one main area, Gaza. What about Gaza, right? In the news, we have moved on. It seems the world is hyper-focused on Lebanon and Israel's attack on it. Its simultaneous attack on Iran, its assassination of the leader of Hezbollah, one of the largest paramilitary forces in the world, and very much, Hezbollah is very much the military wing of Iran in so many ways, and their primary base is in Lebanon. Israel has tried and failed twice over the last several decades to make traction in Lebanon. And people are very concerned, rightfully so, about how far this is going to go and whether we're in an all-out war. What you're not seeing as much is Gaza. You're not hearing about it as much. We're not hearing about Palestinians quite as much. And I know that there's ebbs and flows, and the news, as much as I stay on point and journalism is so incredibly important, it's very much like, okay, what's the newest story? What's the latest story? And that's one of the things that I can't stand. It's one of the things that I think is so important about, us coming together like this. Because what happens when the dust settles? So I thought I would ask some questions, and then I would try to answer those questions. And I'm inviting you to be here with me. I did a lot of research on this, and there's Washington Post and Vox and New York Times. Will Israel ever leave Gaza? Right? Will they ever go? Right now, right? It's a 6-mile strip of land at most. Millions of people are in it. All Palestinian is the equivalent of an open-air prison, and much of the so first of all, just the architecture itself, much of it has been just turned to straight up rubble, just rubble. Prior to the last 365 days, if you were in Gaza, when I went out to that region, right? I've named some of the places, right? I was in Israel. I was in Palestine. Haifa, Hebron, Ramallah, Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem. We weren't allowed to go to Gaza. We were not allowed to go to Gaza. We were not. It was already an open-air prison. That was back in 2017, I want to say. Right? At that time, they couldn't get consistent electricity. They couldn't get consistent health care. They couldn't get running water, clean water, right? But there was some infrastructure. Well, Israel took the opportunity, right, over the past 365 days, whatever you want to call it, to see through their agenda and to just eviscerate any kind of quality of life for Palestinians in Gaza and the future of life for Palestinians in Gaza. So, what's going to happen? Will they ever go? So, and as the news has moved on, and a lot of our attention, I just think, just last week, nearly 100 people were killed by Israeli airstrikes and ground operations in Gaza. The count is still growing, but on just a human level, I understand it is almost impossible to comprehend the idea of 42,000 people dead. So, if we're only talking about Gaza, that in of itself could be considered a forever war that Israel is waging against these people, right? This isn't simply just me. This is the experts and journalists. They're calling it a forever war. We're looking at Lebanon and we're looking at Iran, and Saudi's probably not going to get involved because they want to make their money. And they're happy to just kowtow to Israel or whatever. But in of itself, just with Gaza alone, that is considered a forever war. Gaza is trapped in the perpetual constancy of conflict and chaos and destruction and death. And at this present moment, There are no signs that this is going to change. Right? It's a different kind of occupation than we've ever seen before, right? This is what military analyst Raphael Cohen had to say. The Israeli plan right now is to move a sort of a counterterrorism footing in Gaza that's not going to be withdrawal, but it's going to be a full-on, but it's not going to be a full-on occupation either, right? So this is me now. This isn't from kindness, right? It's not going to be a full-on occupation because, oh, they want some agency for Palestinians. No, Israel has reduced much of Gaza to rubble. So the cries from extremists like Smotrich, right, who's like, you know, in an, he's not the, Kara, would you just look that up really quickly? Because I'm like, he's not the financial minister. But he's in the Knesset. Anyway, just do look that up, and I'll be right back on that. But just hear me out, right? So, like, there's been extremists in the Knesset who are calling for Israel to settle in Gaza. They're not looked at very favorably, right? So they don't want to live. So according to Vox, this new occupation could involve control of the Philadelphia corridor along the border with Egypt, right there, and the so-called Netzarim corridor dividing Gaza's north and south border. So essentially, right? Yeah. What's his position? Oh, he is the finance minister. Okay, well, I've lost that because okay. I was correct. He's the finance minister. So he's one of the extremists, and he, that tries to see through his extremism through policy. And he's like, let's just take over Gaza. But Israelis don't want to live there. They don't want to live amongst the dirt and rubble. So this new kind of occupation, according to Vox, could involve control of very specific areas. But that means what's to become of Gaza then, right? So Cohen says that the real concern is that Gaza gets stuck in a kind of middle state, right? Meaning the low intensity fighting that we're seeing, right? And I mean, I'm calling it low intensity because, of course, it's constant bombs dropping from the sky would be considered high intensity. Low intensity is when fewer airstrikes are happening, but they're still happening then. It could happen indefinitely. That's what Cohen thinks is a possibility, right? With no opportunity for Gaza to rebuild or establish stable governance. That is the dream of Netanyahu and his extremist cronies, right? So according to Israel National News, I have to look to Haaretz, and then I have to go to Israel National News, and then I try to, translate it so that I can get the real, story. So there's a retired IDF general. I might be pronouncing these names wrong. I apologize, but it's, so Giora Island. So this is a retired IDF general. This is what she said in Israel National News. There's been a media blitz in recent weeks that she's helped to incite that's promoting what's been called the General's Plan, right, for Gaza. And this would involve giving the entire civilian population of northern Gaza, that's about 250,000 people, 1 week to evacuate. And then declaring it a closed military zone with no supplies allowed in. Essentially, right? And this is the justification for it. It will starve out any Hamas fighters that remain. Just think about the fact that at this stage, Hamas is any Palestinian that exists. It's been a catch-all term, right? The point is to force Palestinians off their land permanently with the threat of starvation as if that's not already happening. And you might think, well, that's too cruel, right? No, Netanyahu is reportedly considering the plan, right? Even though it is absolutely a war crime. He could just add it to the list. So what about the hostages, right? Because that's the thing on some people's minds. And some people are still held hostage by Hamas, right? What about them? What do we do with them? So Shira Efron is an analyst with the Israel Policy Forum, right? And she's an outside advisor to the Israeli government, right? So that is Efron. So she says, so Efron notes, right, so that Netanyahu, right, when it comes to the hostages and returning them, Netanyahu mentions in every speech that he will do everything possible to bring the hostages back home, but without a negotiated ceasefire, that is becoming increasingly unlikely. More than that, Haaretz reports that Netanyahu has reportedly told legislators that he believes as many as half the remaining hostages may actually already be dead. I'm bringing this up because I need us to understand the extent to which Benjamin Netanyahu and the other far-right extremists that are currently in power and seeking complete authoritarian rule in Israel are just absolutely willing to throw away Israeli lives if it means continued political power for themselves. Let's be very clear about that. This is not about protecting Jewish people, and it's not about protecting Israelis. That's not how ethnocracies work. It requires violence, and it demands it and sacrifice. Wars ensure continued and constant political power. So who will lead Gaza? That's the question, right? Israel doesn't appear to have any desire to provide the security or social services for the civilian population there. That its offensive, its attack has utterly destroyed, right? So the United States, under Biden, pushed ideas involving a, quote, revamped and revitalized Palestinian Authority, right? The body that currently governs the West Bank. So Hamas is supposed to be in power in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is supposed to be in power in the West Bank. We all know that these are just talking heads, largely handpicked by Netanyahu. They took the Palestinian Authority out by the knees. Anybody that was, the Palestinian Authority originally, they tried to fight for a two-state solution that was honoring the dividing lines around 1948. Any of those people he took out, Netanyahu, right? So there's been talk about potentially having them take over control of Gaza, right, from the United States. Netanyahu refused to even consider such a plan, right? He said that this is a quote from him, he said that they would turn Gaza from Hamastan to Fatahstan, which is like Fatah is the party that dominates the Palestinian Authority. Do you see? For him, it's any Palestinian, any Arab ever. It's never been about Hamas. So back to Shira Efron, right? Like she talked about how the Biden administration has also pushed Arab states to take a leading role in Gaza's post-war reconstruction because it's something has to happen. But those countries have ruled out committing to that kind of project without a clear pathway toward a Palestinian state, as in they don't want to help the Israeli government see through its own agenda. So in any event, Efron says, this is a quote, "This has never been a plan that Israel subscribed to." Netanyahu has called vaguely for a civilian government, but Efron says that Netanyahu's his vision relies on finding, quote, unicorn Palestinians qualified to govern the territory, but associated with neither Hamas nor Fatah, nor any other Palestinian faction with a real constituency. Do you see what I'm saying? Israel's government remains opposed to any plan that involves a pathway toward a sovereign Palestinian state. Aaron David Miller is a Mideast peace negotiator for several U.S. administrations with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I had to write all of that out. I'm like, this is a very long thing. But he says, there's no turnkey government that's going to come in and guarantee Israel's security, right? Because that's always the justification. And I'm like, you cannot have any kind of security when you have apartheid on one side and authoritarianism on the other. Both guarantee violence. It's just about who is being brutalized first. So with Gaza right now, there is a need for continued humanitarian aid, and there has to be some infrastructure to figure out a way to deliver it with some kind of consistency. It's still very badly needed. UN officials currently describe Gaza's humanitarian crisis as one of the worst in modern history, with food and health systems in a state of complete collapse. More than 1 million people face extreme malnutrition. We've talked about this in other episodes. The UN estimates that about 2/3 of Gaza's buildings have been damaged or destroyed. And some estimates have put the cost of reconstruction in Gaza at over $80 billion, which is more than 4 times the combined GDP of Gaza and the West Bank before the war. So, I'll say this. Putin and Netanyahu, they want a Trump presidency. They want unbridledness. And I am with everybody who says, how can we say that anything we do is worth it? I understand the emotion. How can we say anything we do is worth it when the Democrats just keep bombing them anyway, right? I understand that justification, but remember that it's actually been underreported, and I think because of the Biden administration, that they've actually, and I'm not saying this in defense of Biden or Kamala Harris. I don't care to defend them. It's just the facts, okay? I'm saying this objectively as fact, that he has called up Netanyahu over and over and over again. They don't even they try not to let it out just how much because it's embarrassing. Netanyahu doesn't give a shit. But it's the difference between some kind of checks on power and absolute no checks on power. That is why Netanyahu wants Trump to win. I can list the things that he was able to see through, but the biggest one, right, is the fact that it would be absolute unchecked money, unchecked war forever and ever under Trump. And Putin wants him because it means that he's going to stop funding to Ukraine and Russia will win the war decisively. There is a constant underestimation of human resilience, always. And you know what's interesting? Biden actually counseled Netanyahu to avoid the mistakes the U.S. made after 9/11, right? When the desire to eliminate, quote, these security threats led to 2 decades of costly wars, mission creep, right, which is where you're just making these kinds of little grounds and you lose ground, and human rights abuses that damage the country's international standing. Open-ended military campaigns with the aim of completely stamping out a threat they don't win. They're not possible. I was going to say we, but no, it's like the costs are always higher than anyone can imagine, right? And interestingly enough, the Biden administration tried to say it was for themselves and for the population under their control. And in the case of Gaza, it's likely to be years before any of these costs are fully tallied. You will never stamp out human resilience. And I don't know any people that embody it more righteously, more committedly than Palestinians. And everyone who aligns himself with that struggle. So, I'd like to read something that Darwish, that he tells us, right? Mahmoud Darwish, Palestinian, a poet. Gaza does not propel people to cool contemplation. Rather, she propels them to erupt and collide with the truth. We currently are facing multiple truths, multiple collisions, right? That's us. That's us. As much as the Israeli government, as much as Benjamin Netanyahu and Smotrich and, Gavir, all of these people, right? Let's look at Jewish people. Every effort was made by the Nazi Party and their collaborators to stamp out any Jewish person in Europe. It didn't work, right? It didn't work. It doesn't work. You don't eradicate people. Human resilience is the thing that I always fall back to. It's the most beautiful, unexpected, supernatural thing in the world. You will never destroy Palestine, right? Palestine is in Haifa. Palestine is in Ramallah. Palestine is in Jerusalem and Nazareth. It always will be. And you will never ensure security or safety by trying to annihilate a people, including brutalizing your own to see it through. And for us, I've got tons to say, but I'll just say this. I wrote something very simple in my stories. I just said authoritarianism and apartheid, I'm going to do it. And I had somebody write to me and say, how could you? That's just so inhumane to say. And I'm like, this is the thing, and we saw it again in the Ta-Nehisi Coates interview, and we'll see it again and again, right? If the mere act of listening, of being aware of someone else's experience or understanding of a situation, if that alone antagonizes you, you're the problem. You are a very, very weak, myopic, narrow-minded individual. And if you came And this little snarky part of me is like, if you came, right, for a battle of wits, simple bitch, you're unarmed. If you don't understand and you can't even comprehend what the argument is, right, what facts are being asserted, you don't have a position. You're just yapping. I don't have fucking time for that. I do that enough. Anyway, my point is there will always be a Palestine, but we cannot take for granted that there's a Palestine right now. And it needs us to keep focused, stay on task, and keep Gaza on your hearts, on your mind, and in your spirits. Our fight is their fight, and their fight is ours. So, with that, why don't we hit the VMs for the question of the day?
Hey, JFK Today Pod. I have been thinking about like the state of the petrochemical companies. There's been some news lately. One item that Chevron is leaving California as its headquarters, and it's going to place its headquarters in Texas. And, you know, the refineries will still be in South LA and everywhere else, but they're moving their headquarters, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then piggybacking on that, Mobil is being sued by the state of California because basically they made up lies about plastics being recyclable, which very few of them actually are. And so I'm just wondering, like, if you think anything positive will come out of this, if you think that, you know, we may be able to regulate these terrible companies. Yeah, just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
What a good question. And you know, it's so funny. That was actually in the docket. And then, you know, I only have so much time with y'all. And so I was like, I'm going to follow this case and like see where it ends up. Because I remember when this whole, like, I found out years ago that recycling was a farce. And I was like, what? But I keep doing it. And, you know, and everyone I know keeps doing it. And there's something, do you know why like, you know why the oil and gas industry made up recycling? Because they knew that rampant and unbridled capitalism weighed heavy on the hearts of everyday people. What I mean is having this, like, people had misgivings about how much shit, you know, how much garbage, like what overproduction and consumerism, how it was changing, you know, our social and political landscapes. We had guilt about that. It was hard for us, like, oh, well, we don't need these things. We can reuse these things, right? We shouldn't buy this because we already have this. And so they actually was like, oh, if we want to keep, you know, consumerism and consumption at an all-time high, we have to alleviate the guilt. And first of all, that should affirm two things. One, that them niggas is evil as hell. Okay? And you know, can always hide behind a corporation, right? Like the players can always hide behind a corporation and those corporate interests, but it's really so that a couple of people can get their little golden parachutes and get the fuck out of here. And it doesn't matter who you poison, doesn't matter, you know, who you harm and everything else, because it's always the corporation, never the players, right? But so that should affirm one thing, that the you know, the ugliness of these corporate entities. But the other thing it should affirm is that people think about things and people care about things. And we recycle because it feels manageable, recycle because it is a common good and people want to feel like they're doing something meaningful. And it's a way that it's incorporated in the everyday lives. And rather than, you know, just be like, fuck it, never recycle again, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's a couple of things that go to the factories, but we don't have the infrastructure to actually reuse things. We could. Earth makes up new shit every time we come up with some new shit. They're like, oh, you want to make some plastics? Cool. I'm going to make a fungus that eats plastic. I'm going to make a mushroom that eats plastic. That's what the Earth does. So, you know, is this going to have, is the state of California suing these oil and gas companies, ExxonMobil, is it going to have an impact? Is it going to lead to regulations? Not necessarily, but I think every time that there's a precedent that is set, that's an opening for us. You know, we go after each other across the left all too often, right? We go after the right too, but we really go after each other. We go after people. I'm like, there are these shadow lobby groups. And that's one thing I really learned about my time in Color of Change that dictates so much of what happened when you start seeing the web of power, right? How many of this guy that's the CEO of this evil corporation that sits on the board of these 6 demonic corporations, there's literally a shadow network. There's a conspiracy that people can buy into that actually exists and is real. But, they work tirelessly and have unlimited funds that stop and kill any kinds of policies that would lead to regulation, right? But think of Warren and Dean, right? Democrats, right? Elizabeth Warren, that are taking on shrinkflation and these corporations and are using this thing that we're seeing on TikTok, right? Shrinkflation, but they're using that to call for more antitrust laws and for more, regulations on corporations. That's what they're doing. So there's precedent set. If we could start to see the narrative and popularize this and make it so that it's easy for folks, I think it's, I can't wait until we're done our identity politics era. I really can't. No, I like identity politics. Identitarian, right? I'm just like, well, hopefully we're running out because we went from, trans people were the hot shit, and now we're, not, and now we're like, oh my God, the Middle East, and then we're going to turn into something. We're going to turn to something else. I'm like, no, we should look up at the powers, So it's not whether or not I think it's going to make a sizable shift or change on corporate regulation, but for us, it's what we want to do with that information. And it always comes down to us. I'm a huge believer in our ability to manifest things because most of you listening, I can certainly say for myself and pretty much everyone I know, none of us should be here. None of us should exist, right? No one should, but we're here. And as long as we're here, everything is possible. So, yes, I don't think it's necessarily going to lead to about every precedent that's set. Well, we get to run. We get to be raggedy as hell and be like, this happened. This is a thing. This is an opening, but it also shows what it looks like. And again, we know California is terrible if you're an incarcerated person. Great if you're a queer. Great if you're trans, right? Terrible if you're poor, depending on where you are. Right. Great if you care about the environment relative to other states. So we're in this both end situation, and how much we want to participate in, how much we can do, that's on us. I love the precedent. It means that there are always pockets of resistance in every place, in every institution, in every hall, in every government body. And I would love it when we can find each other. So I made this an episode that was only about Gaza on purpose. It's a call to action. It's a declaration. It's a prayer. It's a poem, and it's a vision. Because I never want us to forget. I never want us to move on. And I know that we never will, and we shouldn't. Some things, when they break, they have to stay broken. But in its place, right? And when I say that, I mean maybe our understanding of what the world was. Maybe some of us have been disillusioned. But I'm telling you this, something always grows out of that rubble, always. Something always survives. Something always carries on. That's you, that's me. That's the people of Gaza. So thank you for listening to, what can only be, I guess, considered as a special episode. And we will continue to monitor, to fight, and to take action in all the ways that we can. Fuck yeah. Okay, why don't we cue that in music? Just want to say thank you so much for listening to JFK today. It means the world to me. The show really is a labor of love. New episodes drop 4 times a week. We're available everywhere that podcasts are, right? Drop your voice note questions to jfktodayShow@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. Shout out to KR, Carolyn, and the JFK team. That's just that, you guys. Anyway, shout out to you, the listeners, that make it all possible. Love you. Peace.